Greetings, loved ones. Welcome back to another episode of Kaiju Curry House, the British bi-weekly podcast dedicated to bringing you the creme anglaise of B-movie banter. This is episode 69. I'm joined by my friends Paul and Joe, and today we have a senior creature prosthetics artist and puppeteer, Mr. Toby Barron. How is everyone doing?
Fantastic.
Good, thanks.
Wonderful.
Very well, thank you. Thank
Excellent.
you for having me on.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Right, we're going to jump straight to the deep end. Paul, what have Kaiju been up to?
I've been reading a graphic novel, Pacific Rim related. So this is Tales from Year Zero, and it's done by Del Toro. So, you know, it's pretty good. It's a prequel to the film, and it's when they're constructing the wall. Basically, someone's going to interview one of the captains, and they talk about how it all started. So when the first breach happened and how they figured out drifting and stuff. So, you know, if you're missing Pacific Rim, or perhaps you've just enjoyed Pacific Rim the Black, you can pick that up on Amazon for, I think it's under a tenner, and that's up for a hard copy as well, so that's good. And I also watched Monster Hunter, the Mila Jovovich film by Paul Anderson. It started off good and it ended good. And when I say good, I mean fun. You know, it's the script's not going to win any awards, but there was big monsters, big action set pieces. It was good, but the middle, that second act really dragged. Right. So I couldn't recommend it as a rental, but when it comes to Netflix or whatever, it'll be worth a watch. So yeah, not bad, not good, but it was entertaining for the majority. I'll give it that. Okay. Joe, what have Kaiju been up to?
I have been watching Godzilla Singular Point, as you know very well, Paul. Yep. And I have been finally finishing construction on Alex's Graboid.
Hey.
So there we go. So I've been finishing that up in my spare time. But other than that, just enjoying the fine weather down here. Toby, what have Kaiju been up to?
What have I been up to? What have Kaiju been up to? I never stop, really. So I'm always part of a lot of projects. I've started my own business called Red Baron Creative. I am part of many different projects, like The Morning After, not so much Kaiju related, but a lot of, with practical effects, we do a bit of everything, big creatures to zombies to all sorts of things. And I'm also set to direct a film, hopefully maybe towards the end of the year, but probably more like the start of next year.
Well, that sounds great. Are you able to tell us about it, or is it all hush-hush at the moment?
It's a little hush-hush. It's
cool.
It's a great script that we're developing called Splat. It's very much a zombie film. It's I'm looking to introduce a lot of like subcultures that come together, and it's really just this fun little thing of where there's a paintball group of people who come together and they dress up.
Oh, that's where Splat comes from. Nice.
That's it. Yeah. And it all starts off as everyone dressing up as zombies, and lo and behold, of course, the paintballs themselves are infected, and next thing everyone's starting to turn, so we don't know who's what, and it all gets into all sorts of fun carnage with a lot of subcultural references in there as well.
That sounds excellent.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
The bad news is you have to now throw the question at me. We pass it around the table.
And what Kaiju have you been up to, Alex?
I have I have pre-ordered the box set Daimajin, which is the Tokusatsu trilogy, and it was from 1966 onwards by Dai, and I think they got bought out by Katakawa, and from what I understand, Arrow Video are releasing this box set. Matt Frank, who I've had on many times, has done the artwork for it. Have I got that right, Joe?
Yes, you have.
Yeah.
Yep, so Daimajin is coming out this July, and I kind of urge people to get onto Arrow Video and pre-order that, because when we had the incident with the Garamo box set, no one could get that pre-ordered in time. There were lots of copies that people didn't get, so everyone was kind of upset about that. So if you do want to get the Daimajin trilogy box set, pre-order it now. That's coming out in July. Right, introducing our guest, Toby Barron. So we've said that you are a creature prosthetics artist and puppeteer. For our listeners who might not know what creature prosthetics are, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a broad-ranging term, because really what we do, a lot of the similar processes are involved, whether it's a zombie or whether it's a 24 creature. Ultimately, it's a lot of the same processes. So a lot of effects artists are more than capable of usually handling all the various types. So we'll range from creature design to creature builds. We'll also do, you know, the prosthetics that go directly onto people themselves. So it's a whole range of artistry that is sort of encapsulated in something called, you know, creature design, prosthetics, animatronics. Although that's a little bit less so with visual effects having taken over so much of the bigger portion of the bigger monster stuff. But when we get to do it, of course, it's yeah, it's just fantastic. And like as we'll talk about with Love and Monsters, the two marry together very well these days. So yeah, it's a very broad spectrum sort of statement. And as we saw even with the Oscars, that you know we know that Love and Monsters was just nominated for, unfortunately didn't win, but just the fact that we're nominated is just something incredibly special. So for us, it's a lot of like supporting of a practical element that the actors can engage with and interact with. And when we're lucky, they also choose to keep it in the film, often augmented by visual effects as well, though.
When did you first get into this industry?
Wow, that was a while ago. Yeah, look, I guess my story was I went to university and was doing visual arts, and I always knew in some way, shape, or form I'd be an artist. And I thought, you know, go to uni and do the degree and all that kind of stuff. Well, while I was there, very quickly, my painting lecturer actually turned to me and two other guys, which is what's important, because I thought that they were fantastic artists. And he basically was encouraging us to leave. And we did. And as part of that, you know, I went through, I guess, my first, it's not a midlife crisis, I guess it's an early life crisis where I didn't know what I was going to do. And as part of that, I saw an ad in the paper because I left uni, and this guy advertised artist preferred, and answered the ad, went there around midday, and we got chatting. And then by 11 o'clock that night, pretty much said, oh, look, you know, do I have the room? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And then he showed me downstairs on a, at that time, an independent film that he was working on. And he said, yeah, do you want to help? I said, well, geez, of course. And this is, again, at the time where I had no idea what I was going to do. I didn't know how I was going to be an artist. I hadn't found any of my own style or any of those sort of things. So all of a sudden I found the film industry. And yeah, Steve Boyle, who was he's, you know, just been an incredible influence to me. And I've, you know, worked with him many, many times, including he was one of the head of creatures for Love and Monsters. And so we've been friends for what, 25 odd years, and it's just been an incredible relationship. And so in a way, I feel really lucky. I feel like I fell into it, and yeah, the rest is sort of history, I guess.
Regarding falling into it, I feel like one of the things that we always need to stress about art and getting into the industry and practical effects is that nobody's born necessarily with an innate talent to create this stuff.
Very true.
To just let everybody know, how much practice did you have to put into your job role?
It doesn't stop. Like it's still there. And, you know, what I would encourage any artist to do is learn every aspect of it. You know, there's no preciousness there. And, you know, you may become like the head sculptor or whatever, which takes a long time, but every part of it's interesting. Every part of it becomes a tool, you know, a feather in your cap, so to speak. So I learned mold making and focused on that. Then I learned and became one of the heads at John Cox Creature Workshop, one of these head foam technicians and one of the mold makers there. And you just build up those sorts of skills while you pursue doing your own stuff. And then from that, you just get to the point when you realize, kind of, wow, I actually have a lot to offer, and I can do many, many different parts of the job. And we will have generalists, which I guess I started off as, and then out of that, you usually find within yourself what you really are called to do. So for me, a big part of it was sculpture. But you know, there'll be people who just focus on mold making, and it's an art form in and of itself. You've got your designers, you have your fabricators, your finishers. There's a lot of very specialist areas. So if you're in any way, shape, or form inclined, there's usually a spot for you, you know.
That's really cool. Yeah, so you start off perhaps on a smaller project where you get to try all the different areas almost of art, and yeah, and find out which one is best for you almost.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
What would you recommend? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, what is your favorite aspect of the job? You were mentioning so many different types of roles. Is
Yeah.
there an aspect that you think, oh, I love this the most? This is my passion.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest draw was really the first time I was on set, which goes way back to when I first met Steve Boyle. And it you know, there was all the fun of making it and just how incredibly fulfilling that was. But the first time I walked on set, I was sold. And for some people, that's not the case. Some don't even like being there, but for me, that was really it. And then on top of that, I guess other things built. So definitely sculpting. I've had a strong focus there, but puppeteering is probably one of my favorite things to do. I think I have always had that little desire to, I guess, be on the screen, you know. Acting, you know, don't have quite my chops there, but being a puppeteer or being inside a creature, like at the beginning of Love and Monsters, where you see I keep calling the bird's art, I'm not sure what they've changed it to, but being in the suit itself is just so much fun. It's painful, but it's a lot of fun.
Well, just to stop you there, with us being such huge fans of Suitmation, the legacy of Godzilla, Gamera, and the Japanese influence there, can you tell us more about being in the suit? What's that like?
Well, yeah. Often painful. You're
Painful.
You're usually in positions that the human body is not really supposed to be in. So yeah, I mean, we do often 10-hour plus days, and you know, when you're shooting that sort of thing, you may have your little aches and pains, and you just push through. And I think it's the adrenaline of doing what you do that really takes you through that process. And along with puppeteering, like I puppeteered the Mavis, the robot that was in Love and Monsters, and you know, doing things like learning the lines and learning the subtlety of the movement and bringing out that performance. Oh yeah, it just lights up my life. It's just, yeah, an amazing thing.
You puppeteered Mavis. That's awesome.
Yeah, geez. Yeah,
she was a great character. I really enjoyed. It's like, oh, a lovely lady has caught your eye. It's just like whoosh. It was so corny, and it was just
Yeah.
That's not the way a human would.
Yeah, like it's a robot. Yeah.
Yeah.
What does an average day involve in your world?
In my world, so again, I pretty much do, you know, wherever I can, I do as much as possible. So for us, it's often we're involved in pre-production. So we'll talk about the designs, how we'll execute the designs, then how we'll make them. So we'll go through a sculpting process or a carving process. We might make it directly, or we might make a mold of that creature, and then pull out a foam latex copy or whatever, you know, whatever it needs to be, whether it's hard or soft or such. Then from there, we'll fabricate it, do things like the finishing, the seaming, and all those stuff, which is quite a laborious task, which really matters. I mean, if you've ever seen a seam, which you do in a lot of the earlier films, like for us effects artists, we notice that instantly. So it's that level of detail, really, that it's what it's about. And I think that's what drives us, because we know that in some ways, you know, I know bronze, you could say, is probably the most immortal art form, but for me, having something then on screen for everybody to review and watch and look over and over and criticize and break down, you can imagine how much attention we're bringing to it to make the fans happy and fulfill ourselves. And then from there, it'll be, we'll take it out on set. It might be the puppeteered, or it might be a static creature like the Centigator, which didn't quite make the final cut. As a deleted scene, I believe it's on the Blu-ray. So it just depends on what the object is, whether it's a creature or a puppet, or whether it's a prosthetic on an actor. So like a prosthetic, for example, like we'll be one of the first people along with unit on a set, early start, 3 a.m. in the morning, so to speak, and a few hours to apply it, and then babysitting that all day. And then we're one of the last ones to leave because we've got to then remove it and clean the actor or actress up afterwards and make sure that they're all well looked after. So often long days. I think the longest I have done is like a 90-hour week or something, but the average is, 50, 60 hours or so.
That's awesome. So you had me at Centigator, so now I'm definitely going to pick up that Blu-ray. But yeah, I heard in the original montage or monologue in the beginning of Love Monsters, like things like lizards, alligators, and stuff. Like, is there going to be an alligator? This is ooh. But I wanted to ask you. You're talking about an immortal art form where everybody likes to criticize, likes to look at. I want to talk about inspiration. So I'd like to ask this of all of our special effects artists. What maybe you can go one or two scenes, one or two movies with practical effects that inspired you, and then maybe one or two things that you've done that you're particularly proud of and people should look at.
Oh my gosh, what a question. Okay, so what inspires me? Well, I mean, I guess I have my absolute favorites, and most of those usually have to do with the undead. So like the Romero films, massive fan of people like Tom Savini and how incredibly innovative. And I think we're missing that a little bit these days. We have it a little bit easier, I guess, because all your Rick Bakers and your Tom Savinis, etc., they all innovated at a time when there wasn't a lot there, and we're sort of on the back end of that where we get to stand on the shoulder of those giants. But my all-time favorite would have to be Return of the Living Dead. Just love that film. Watch it every few months. Along with, I guess, wow, there's so many I could say, and now that's why I'm drawing, I guess, a blank. But I'm often a fan, and I think that's what is so special about what we get to do. Is I'm such a fan often of what we're working on. And, while there's been so many other things that I've loved to see, like, hands down, Alien, Predator, all the stuff Alec Gillis, etc. did, I just love that stuff, and would love to have the opportunity to ever work on one of those sorts of things. But yeah, did that answer the question? I'm not quite sure. And then my favorite, is that the next part of that question? My favorites would be, gee whiz. Oh, like Rogue that we did for John Cox, the crocodile for that was just an incredible piece of engineering. And then there's creatures, well, like the Host, I guess we'll talk about a little bit later. That creature alone was so complicated. And when we were building it, I knew that there was going to be a very heavy visual effects component because of how much it moves and does what it does in the movie. But getting to make such a complicated creature that worked, that could suck somebody into it and chomp and spit and move and tongue wagging and then spit it back out. I'm often a fan of the things that I get to work on. Yeah.
So as I understand it, you're basically saying that when you're working on a project, you kind of become absorbed by that, and that's your passion at the time.
It's your whole life, yeah.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, if you're putting in 60, 70 hours, then it's going to be your focus. You kind of need to be set on, this is what I'm doing, this is my life for the time being.
Yep, absolutely. It's all you eat, sleep, and drink it. You know what I mean? It's all consuming, and there's something really special about that because the relationships you form, so many artists I've worked with here, and I know they're just incredible people, and the talent that gets brought to it, the problem solving being, I guess, one of the main things, because we're really still ultimately working with very raw materials, fiberglass, foam, latex, and to bring it together and make it something that you can look at times and even freak yourself out about at times. It's like, look at this thing. It looks alive, I mean, obviously brought together by the lighting, the camera work and direction. But I guess it's, yeah, that speaks to it the most. It's the fact that it's such a team sport. It's really one of the most rewarding things I think we can do in life is be part of each other and share our gifts with each other.
Just you saying about how it's all consuming, what's it like stepping down when a project's finally wrapped up? How does it feel emotionally?
Yeah, good.
Watching a kid graduate.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I'm getting to learn more about production and directing and things like that, I mean, you really do see it's almost a miracle that a film gets made. It really is. There's so much that has to come together. So often by the time, I guess when I was a junior, you're just called up on the Friday and suddenly you're working on the Monday, and that's just full on. And then afterward, you have no idea what's happening next, whether you're going to get hired again. If you often feel that there's more that you could have done, or so much in the you're still dealing with people, so there's all those interactions that you have there. And yeah, I mean, a lot of us live with a little bit of an anxiety, I guess, of what's going to be next. Are we ever going to work again? Is it ever going to happen again? And not to mention, for a lot of people, especially if they have young families, etc., that's quite a stress. It's contract work, so you just often don't know what's going to happen next. And I know that's why a lot of people end up creating a side hustle, or using those same skill sets to create a figurine business, or whatever it might be. So for those who stay in it, you're always living with that. And I guess I'm, really lucky and really grateful that I get to, I've made a lot of connections. That means that there's always projects there, but of course, balancing that out with life, and, you got to pay the rent and all the bills and everything, and yet not know what's going to happen, So, not to mention, there's even the fact that, in Australia, I don't know how it is, say, for over there, etc. But, a lot of our wages and stuff haven't changed over the years. Well, everything else goes up. So, you may be restituted fairly well, but I guess a part where, what you're paid, you're living off for potentially a long time. So like after Love and Monsters, we were hoping to go on to some other projects fairly quickly and didn't. And so suddenly had done fairly well on that, but then, you're living off that. So all your savings get eaten up, and it can make that a little bit tricky for getting ahead in other areas of life, so to speak.
So there's a very kind of real life aspect to that. It's whilst you're working on projects that are, internationally renowned and nominated for awards, there's still kind of the bare bones of I need to live. This money is what I live off, which is, I think, is an important message there. Right, well, we are up to our first break. Thank you very much, everyone who's been listening so far. We're going to be returning, and we're going to be speaking specifically about Love and Monsters, which came out last year. Thank you very much.
Hello, and welcome back to episode 69 of Kaiju Curry House. This week, we are talking to Toby Barron, and we're going over his involvement with Love and Monsters. Toby, how did you get started with this project?
How did I get started? Well, we got started, I guess, from a sort of put forward. Our name got put forward by the incredible Matt Sloan, who was the head of visual effects. And they were discussing at the time, because as a lot of films often do, about, should there be some practical elements, or do we just keep it all VFX? And as we know, it's so often reported that actors love to engage with something physical. So we've been part of, in the past, where we would make something physical and it ultimately ends up becoming a visual effect. There's still something really good about that, just because actors appreciate it so much. So there was always going to be a question of how visual effects heavy, how much practical was going to be in there. And, it still is a visual effects heavy film, and rightly so. To do those sorts of effects these days on that kind of budget, it just isn't there. We can replicate a lot of things practically. It often looks, there's something about practical. Everyone's acknowledged it. Practical is not going to go away anytime ever, really, because of what it brings to the table. But I guess the best things these days is when it's a bit of a merger of the two. And, Matt Sloan, I think very early recognized that a bit of that would be really beneficial to the film. And thankfully, because even I think with Mavis, who, for hard edge modeling, things like visual effects for that work really, really well. But the fact that it was a practical, there's something emotionally that comes forward when there is that practical element there, even when it's augmented by VFX. Not to mention when it is a straight out creature like the crab. The crab is just amazing. I think it's, and this, again, if we were to make that as a practical effects, it would be a very, very, very expensive film. So there's a certain crossover that really works. Not to mention there's a lot more that you can get out of a visual effect that, would be too much to ask of a practical effect. But to go back to the question, I guess he put us forward, and through, the incredible reputation of Steve Boyle, thankfully we landed the job. And I've worked with Steve on and off for, I guess, over 20 years. And yeah, we were just super excited by what the creatures were that they were asking us to make the practical element. Like when you see the first creature, I guess, of the the opening scene when it comes through into the bunker and it tears down the shower curtain. They were very keen to have that very goopy and very visceral. And in those sorts of instances, it is one of those things that are practical comes across very strongly. It ends up being ultimately cheaper to do it that way than doing things like those sorts of things in visual effects. Of course, they can do it, but when we can do it practically, they often ask us to do so. So it was just one of those opportunities that we got a bunch of the creatures like the centigator, that first creature I just mentioned. There was the blown up once the queen, I can't remember what they call it now, but we call it
gobbler,
the graboid. Sorry,
yeah.
gobbler.
And it explodes, and then you see a shot of it after it's been exploded, just sitting in the mountain. Well, we made that practically, but it was heavily augmented digitally to give a bit more movement and drippiness and stuff to it. But I think when the two work together, and that's what Matt Sloan recognized, I think very early on too, is that to come on the top of a practical effect, it's in some ways, I guess, an easier job for them as well. And they've got a really good base to work off. So even with that first creature that I was inside of, that one that enters the bunker right at the start. So the first part you see when it breaks the curtain and comes near him, it's dripping and near his head, near Dylan's face. Yeah, that was all practical, but what you saw in terms of the size of the creature, its legs and everything else, that was added digitally. So often we will just do a part of it to really get all of those real world feels, if you like, of the lighting, how it bounces and all that kind of stuff, which, is still quite a job for visual effects to do. When it's augmented in that way, that's all stuff that practically it's almost, well, like I said, it becomes very expensive. So they took care of those sorts of things, and we would do things like some of those close-ups for that, or like that, the queen that gets exploded. We provided a practical asset which they, digitally augment. Things like the centigator, which again is in the cut scene, that was just all practical because it's a dead thing lying there. So that's easy enough for us to do. Then we did, what else did we do? Well, Mavis, who, we had the designs made up. It was 3D printed. We then made molds of it to make the multiple copies of it, because there's the one where Dylan shoots the arrow into it. So it's just purely practical. And then when it is myself puppeteering it for that scene with Dylan, it's all practical except for things like the hands. So to take that as an example, the hand to articulate or to make animatronic, we can do it, but it becomes more expensive.
To replicate it that many times, yeah.
Yeah. And to get that performance correct, like it was easy enough for me to do the performance of everything else she does. But when you're adding on like a hand movement, which would have required multiple puppeteers, um, there's a lot more that has to sync up when visual effects can come in and go, we can easily manipulate it and do what it needs to do. So all the hand gestures or all of the projection, like on her face, like she was lit up, but all of that stuff, like, when they show Dylan his mom and all that kind of stuff, that's of course visual effects that come in. So that's where you see a marry of the two. It's just works. It's such a better pipeline. And it ends up being stronger, I guess, for it, because sometimes we'll do all that practical effects and still won't quite sell. So there's the magic of visual effects on top of it. Again, to me, I think the best, for all future directors or whatever, really get au fait with what visual effects and what practical can offer. When you talk to both, you'll see how to marry the two and you'll get the best of both worlds.
So talking about the best of both worlds there,
Mm.
We went over this while we were on break, but I think for our listeners, they would really like to see what scenes in Love and Monsters were practical, like where,
Right.
you were doing this. So we've gone over Antzilla and the centipede. So
Yep.
what other areas were there practical effects where you might not have imagined that there would be, or you did such a great job that people would be like, oh, that has to be CGI or something, not to insult.
Yeah, no, and it's one of those. Yeah, it's always lovely, of course, because for me, the best thing is when the audience gets to doubt what it is. I think that's when everyone's doing their job, visual effects and practical. So things like all those leeches that were on Dylan when he was in the water and comes out and rips them off. They're practical, but with like a digital augment on them. Things like, again, the exploding queen. All of it's digital up until the explosion. All the guts and everything else are practical. The residual of it left in the side of the mountain, the hill there, is practical, but then digitally augmented. What else was there? There was, the first creature I was talking about, that's practical, except for when you see it in the full screen, you see all the legs and everything else. They're digital augments to it. Let me think, what else was there?
The boulder snail, because that's my favorite monster.
Oh yeah, no, that was all digital. The crab was all digital. Again, it was I would say, if you said a ratio, you'd say 3/4 of it was digital. And so the practical, I guess what's great about that and what's great about the question is that it does hide what we do, so that the practical adds to it, and gives it another dimension, like Mavis. I mean, again, Mavis could have been a digital robot, but again, it reads better. And there's a moment where he hugs her as she dies. To do that digitally, you could do it, but there's something magical about that practical element there. Even though, again, her faceplate was digital, her hand was digital, but all the rest was performance.
And they marry together so well, don't they? Because
oh yeah, when it's done really well, and when we get to work with, and again, Matt Sloan, I think what was so great about him, recommending us, Steve, was that he knew this. He knew that, where you guys could take that on. One, it also helps because you can imagine these days, like digital, they have so much on their plate. There's so much work. There's great YouTubes and stuff out there now about just the level of work that they had to do. So part of that is where we can just take some of that pressure off them, in the same way for us, where we don't have to articulate Mavis's hand. They can take that on and go, yeah, look, that's not a problem. And again, for future directors, filmmakers, really understanding the merge of the two. And more these days, the digital and the practical are really keen to work together. I think in the very early days, that wasn't the case. Everyone was like, no, you don't get to do that, and there was a bit of a war there. But now that's not the case. It's really beautiful to see that, again, when filmmakers understand how both of them can work together, you get an incredible result where, things like what the question insinuates is what's what anymore. And I love that you know, we're in the business of smoke and mirrors, and when we can really sell you something where you question that, then everyone's doing their job.
One of the questions from our group was that they were asking, were any monsters deemed too scary to be included? Because obviously this is a relatively family-friendly film. It's not particularly, you know, well, it's accessible, isn't it? It's a film for the
My
whole
8-year-old
family, which is what
watched
you
it.
said to me.
You know,
There we
like
go.
there you go.
There we go. Yeah. So were there any monsters that kind of were designed, but actually they didn't make the cut in terms of the fear factor, rather than just kind of editing for time?
You know, I don't think so. A lot of what I got to see in terms of this is just personally, I'm not sure if there might be other answers to this, but what I got to see was a lot of the creatures that were designed for it made it, you know. To me, you know, that your background there, Alex, that creature is terrifying. And we made a practical element for that where we had these fingers that I hand puppeteered that, you know, sort of come around and show it. But obviously then they developed the design more, and then the fingers didn't really work, and it wasn't really necessary. But to me, that creature is terrifying. The original creature that you first see, it's terrifying. Like when we made it, I had that question. It was like, this is a kids/teens kind of family-friendly show. This thing is horrifying. It's a cross between a spider and a bird, and you know, looking at them, it was, yeah, I wondered how they were going to pull it off. And I think that's a real testament to, you know, the acting and Michael's direction, how to make something that is ultimately, you know, it's supposed to terrify Dylan, and Dylan responds in a terrified way, yet there's a beauty to them. I think it's like how anyone looks at an insect. You're either frightened of a spider or you think they're beautiful. So I think that's what's so amazing about creatures like this, where we get to make something still really terrifying and don't, you know, downplay it or make it cutesy. It's still a legitimately frightening creature. But then you look at the boulder snail, it's just so beautiful. But again, at first frightened by it, but ultimately it's, you know, you want to have one as a pet, you know.
So here's a question for you.
Yes.
So this is another question that's come. The Chumbler. Everybody was wanting to see more of this Chumbler, and then the brief snippets that we get for this thing that's supposedly quite epic, you know, they're in the credits, and then maybe like partial glance of it walking through the trees. Yeah. So how much creature design went into the Chumbler, and where is that? Because people want to see it.
They're all very fleshed out, and you know, there's a real question about whether there's going to be a second one. I truly hope there is, because there were so many designs done that I think hint at that, and creatures like that, like even all the way through. There's a couple of little ones that didn't quite make it as well that I think very much lead to, you know, I think by the end he's writing a second book, you know. So the first book, we already know there's a lot of creatures that are probably not seen. So I know that there was multiple designs done, and obviously out of all those, they choose the ones that are going to represent the, you know, the emotional tone and drive the story forward. But of course, you know, for future movies, there's definitely a lot of scope for a lot of other stuff to be in there. I mean, we're dealing with everything crossed with everything, mutated, and you know, it's just a plethora of stuff that you could explore.
See, it's Joe that I have to thank for this, because I was saying to Joe, I want to watch a film and we should get some new content out. And Joe said, Love and Monsters. I was like, I'll see what else there is. And, you know, no, seriously, watch Love and Monsters right now. And I did. And within about 30 seconds, when the intro's playing and it's President killed by a giant moth, I was like,
yeah,
son of a bitch, I'm in. Yeah, okay.
You went straight to Mothra, didn't you, Alex? You're like,
exactly that. I was like, right,
that's
okay.
exactly where it went.
You know, who did the art behind this? Right, okay, I'm going stalking. But it's a wonderful film, and I think what I really enjoyed was that it is full of tropes to kind of other films of this genre. When they're all kind of at that bunker table, I got Alien vibes. When they're all kind of just having a natter over dinner, I thought, in another circumstance, I can imagine someone's chest opening. And similarly, I very much got Zombieland vibes with kind of the interactions between Minnow and Clyde. But similarly, Hit Girl and Big Daddy, I kind of got that. What film was that from? That was Kick-Ass, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of got that dynamic. So it was fun how it felt so referential to other films not that long ago, but then further back with Alien. But it didn't feel so referential that it was patronizing. You know, it was
and you know,
lovely.
I think there's a slight criticism there of, you know, is it in that way, you know, borrowing too much from them, or a little bit
I don't
too
think so.
whatever generic or something. But I think that's just a very, you know, a critiques criticism that you know, for me, it's a homage, if at most. And I think it really does stand alone. And you know, of course, we can see whatever we want to in those things, but to me, it's refreshing. It's a very lovely take on the world. And you know, not to mention in our uh, current / post COVID world, it's something that really speaks to all of us about how we can be brought together in that way. You know.
Definitely.
I
And
think it's a. Oh,
sorry,
go ahead.
after you. I was just going to say that I think down to the viewer, like you could be watching Pacific Rim and half the audience could be saying, well, this is so referential to the world of kaiju that it feels kind of just plagiarism. And on the other hand, it's, well, no, this is a love letter to that genre. And for that reason, I do enjoy it. Now, as it happens, I'm not a huge fan of Pacific Rim, but that doesn't mean that I consider it plagiarism. It's just that it's not to my taste. But when I watched Love and Monsters, you know, I was seeing all these things. I recognize that, but I wasn't going, no, this is a copy. It felt like a love letter. It was a homage. It was beautiful form.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a very refreshing take. I think what they did, or what you guys did, is that you take monster movies, you know, and turn it into kind of like a zombie feature. So it's in monster movies, more often than not, what you're getting is the perspective of a scientist, upper levels, the president, people that are not in danger, you know, well, with the exception of, say, Love and Monsters, where the president's killed by a moth. But, you know, these are things where like these people aren't in danger. You're not seeing like the real world consequences. Like, yeah, we're going to shoot missiles at Godzilla. Like, okay, what about, you know, Bob and Debbie that were the collateral in that? You know, you don't see that. Whereas in Love and Monsters, you're seeing like a tertiary level, like this is what happened. And I think it was really fantastic because zombie movies, it isn't about like the first wave, the first response. Maybe World War Z is, but it's just, you're looking at the aftermath, the survival, the real world psychological effects. And it's really interesting to see the long-term potential draw out of what would happen. And with the exception of maybe like a twinge of Cloverfield, like you don't really get that in many other films. But what Love and Monsters did is they decided to like zero in on that concept. And then not only did they do that, they made it accessible to like a wider audience. Like I said, like we previewed it, of course, before we showed it to them. But my family has 4 children, and we have a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old going on 10, and a 13. And they all watched it, and they all absolutely loved it. The 13-year-old, for instance, it was really funny because she came in and was like, oh, this is another one of Joe's monster movies. So she has her, you know, tablet or whatever, you know, TikToking it up with, you know, like her earbuds in, and then like slowly, like more and more glances up, and then eventually, you know, like the pad goes down. It's just like, it really draws you in.
That's huge in and of itself.
Yeah. I mean, but it draws you in. It is original in its own right, just for sake of its concept and who it's aimed at, and by sake of demographics. So I really enjoyed this movie, not only just because of its fresh take on large monsters, but because I can watch this with a family. And yeah, it's a human story. It's a fun story. And just like the comments that are made, it's like, you're a terrible shot, or you only get one, you know, like you can't have a good night's sleep or a hot dinner. And it's just like things that you don't consider. Again, when the scientists are going through in like their helicopters or whatever, you don't have to think about, oh yeah, well, we cooked dinner tonight. Something's going to smell that, so we can't stay here. You can't sleep. Like these are great concepts. And then the monsters themselves, do they vaguely resemble creatures in real life? Yes, but has any, well, I was going to say this, Mysterious Island did giant crab, so I can't really necessarily come out with like the giant crab is a completely original concept, but a sentient giant crab, you know, that can recognize a benefactor and a tormentor, you know, like that's a neat concept. Or you know, like you can look in their eyes and tell, you know, like whether or not they're violent. Like this is really great. So I think that Love and Monsters has all to offer audiences.
Yeah.
I mean, like anybody could watch this film and find something that they enjoy with it. And I think
Absolutely.
that is its appeal, whether or not it has ties to other franchises. Because at this point, there have been a lot of stories told. You're going to find a lot of similarities wherever you decide to look. You can make similarities. But
well, I once was told about creativity itself by this teacher, and it was the best explanation of creativity that I've heard, which is, nothing in a sense, I guess, is original. Could probably cite some examples, but I'd almost guarantee that even those so-called original ideas still have a relationship to a lot of things that already exist. So this teacher had once told me that creativity is really about bringing all of the elements that are already here, bringing them together in such a way, mixing it up, mashing it up, and then creating out of that what we would call something as original. And it's not. I mean, at the end of the day, it is, the more we base it in reality, the more that we base it in things that we've known and then put that twist in it, that is a new form of originality. It is a new creativity that allows us to explore it in a different way. And again, all of this still comes back down to, and what I think Love and Monsters did so well was that it really brought, and originally it was called Monster Problems, and the problems that he has and the problem with the monsters. But
I think we can all agree that the title that they went with is a good one.
It's so much better because it really is about, it's a love story, and it's an incredible story of also an unrequited love and his maturity that comes from it. And I think that alone is worth the price of admission, because that journey alone, as he matures, is, not to mention, kudos to Dylan O'Brien. He just sold that so well. And having seen a lot of other stuff, because when I knew he was on it, I watched a lot of his other things, like American Sniper is fantastic. I thought, how's this guy going to play this character, this role? And to see that come out, that's what makes the monsters good. That's the funny thing. It wouldn't be that without that human story, without that love story.
And we do regularly get people say, oh, I enjoyed such and such a monster movie, but I didn't like the script. Or you don't watch it for the human characters. I completely disagree. Yeah. In the case of Love and Monsters, I think that the dynamic between the characters was brilliant. I was totally sold on Joel. I think he's wonderfully awkward, and I think he's very flawed. In a believable sense, he wasn't kind of comically flawed. He was very relatable. Yeah. And there was character growth throughout. And I thought, it's perfect. Yeah. So I've high praise.
I think from examples like Zombieland, where it's so easy to make those parallels, but at the same time, it becomes its own because of those things. Yeah.
Even subtle things like Minnow kind of being that tomboy and kind of being rough and ready, and yet so delighted by the makeup. I thought that was wonderfully balanced, kind of seeing those different sides to her. She wasn't one-dimensional. Yeah. It is time for our second break. When we return, let's get talking about The Host, if we can go back to those memories, Toby.
Right, yeah.
And then we'll give some personal recommendations for other things that we should look out for. Thank you very much.
Great. And welcome back to the final part of Kaiju Curry House. My name is Toby Barron, a creature effects artist, and here we go, talking about The Host.
Whereabouts are you on the picture behind me? Let's have a look.
Me? Oh yeah, that's a young me. That's when I had my long hair, and look at that lovely beard going on. The grey shirt with the dark blue sleeves. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What year was that?
2005.
Okay, 16 years ago.
Oof.
And let's go,
Alex. Jeez, man.
I'm sorry. Right, okay, I'm having technical problems. Thank you. We're going to have to go now. No, tell us about your involvement with The Host, because this is probably my favorite monster movie. I adore it.
I couldn't even believe we were going to make this thing. It's just seemed so big, and it was so complicated. There was so many moving parts. This thing had to swallow someone, spit someone out, use its tongue, had all these flaps. Its eye, one of its eye, not the damaged eye, moved. It was an incredible build. And this is with John Cox Creature Workshop. So this was really the heyday before visual effects really took over big things. So we got to, and even though this is a very visual effects heavy film as well, it's again one of those really awesome marriages of where visual effects take care of it, running down the steps and diving in the water and all the stuff that it did. And then when it came up to the nice close-ups, like, you know, when the main actor stabs it in the eye and when it spits out the other person, that was when the practical really came into its own. And again, whenever you have an actor interacting with something, this is really where practical shines. But again, this build, it was, I mean, such an honor to be part of. That was at a stage where I'd sort of got my chops up enough where I was one of the sculptors. You know, David Wren was the lead sculptor, who's just an amazing sculptor, along with, you know, Richard Muick. I think Tobias Jarkey and Liam Hardy also was sculpting, because it was a big sculpt. So like it took us weeks to do. There were so many parts that had to come together. So you can imagine for John Cox, like figuring out how that was all going to come together is just a mind mess of itself. Then it was a big molding team with like Brett Beecham, I think, and Josh Head. And then parallel to when we're making something like that, this is where it gets really tricky. You're making this very complicated, very detailed, very, in some way, like a lot of like its side flaps and again the tongue and everything else, they're all independent mechanical movements in and of themselves. So the mechanical team works side by side with what we're doing. Now you can imagine they're often making things blind because they don't quite know what we're going to throw at them. If you built it all first and then had animatronics come on top of it, it would be somewhat, I guess, easier. But, you know, a lot of these things in terms of getting something done efficiently, it's all done at the same time. So there's a lot of communication back and forth. And, you know, that was led by the animatronics by Sonny Tilders, James Paul, and Stephen Wren, who unfortunately just passed, rest in peace, an incredible mechanical artist, and Trevor Ty. You know, so if you look at that, that's still a relatively small team that builds such an incredibly complex creature. And then from there, along with people who contributed during it too, you know, James Paul obviously was one of the animatronics, but they got to perform along with Richard Muick and Dan Carlisle. Got to take it over to Korea, and if you look at, actually, if you guys are interested, there's a YouTube of a lot of John Cox's creatures from like Rogue and Peter Pan and amazing stuff that he did. But the host one in particular, a really good YouTube to check out, is Sculpting the Giant Fish Monster for Bong Joon-ho's The Host. And that really shows a great montage of from beginning to end. So you get to see what it looked like out on set and what they did with it, right? Yeah, from the very first sculpting of it right through to the whole, you know, the whole process.
How was this transported? So sorry, Paul. How on earth was that transported over to Korea?
Actually, they picked it up.
No, but yeah, that's quite.
Look at the size of it.
I imagine it was chucked in a container and taken over.
Yeah, it's a
we
unit.
do that a lot because Australia is such a broad country, and I'll often work on things that, you know, we do in South Australia or down in Victoria. So a lot of us are very transient when we do these things. Or over in New Zealand, I worked on Ash vs Evil Dead, the latest season. So we're very willing to travel. We often have to ship mega things, including driving down the highway with a massive crocodile on a tow truck. You know, getting glances, I guess, from everyone as we go down. It's a bit of fun.
That's a road trip kid's dream to see
Yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely.
Like, you know, I can imagine like the kids doing road trips in Australia. It's like, Dad, we've been in the car for 2. What is that?
What is that? Yeah. That's why I love putting like the dead bodies that I make in the passenger seat, just to get a response.
Have you ever been pulled over for something for that? You know, like you just
No,
have
not
like
quite,
these
but I can
zombies in
imagine
the back of your pickup.
Yeah.
It's your question.
Sorry, yeah, no, I was just going to say, because this is obviously a Korean film.
Yeah.
You're in Australia. How were they? Did they send you over some artwork, or did they just give you? Like, I was wondering how much creativity do you get, and how did they check up on you at all? Did you have to do video calls to show the progress, things like that?
Look, It all depends. So sometimes we, as the workshop ourselves, we might do the designs and it gets, back and forth and approved. But all too often, like there's a pre-production stage, which is where we usually come in. But in the pre-production stage is where a lot of that sort of development and knocking out designs to obviously sell to investors to get them on board in the first place. So often those initial designs, are the ones that they'll often run with because they're the ones that have been approved. But in there, we're often looking at a 2D design. And even though they might be fleshed out in, orthographic views, etc., we will still need to take a lot of creative license in how we render that in a 3D world. So a drawing will definitely take you so far, and especially if they do all aspects. And then from there, we'll develop on that on top of it. But it always keeps true to the essence of what the director wanted in the first place, the initial vision.
Okay. Yeah, because the director obviously isn't going to be an artist, so he's got something in his mind that he's trying to get someone to draw out for him.
Exactly.
Yeah. So do you have to almost bid for the job? Are you competing against other companies that do some artwork and they go with whoever kind of gets the feeling the best?
I mean, a certain reputation gets built. Again, John Cox, a winner of the Oscar for Babe, you can imagine when they're in talks with him, because, one of the first projects I worked on at his workshop was Scooby-Doo. And, there in especially back, I guess, in those days when animatronics featured so heavily, John Cox was just one of the forefront, one of the pioneers of that trade here in Australia. So, it was kind of, and then in that way, a bit of a no-brainer that he would be one of the people that they go to. But yeah, it's always usually a bidding with each other. But in the same way, most of the effects companies I know, all of us know each other here. It's a small but big industry. There is that competition, but it's a very friendly competition. And often a lot of the people who would, say, compete against end up in a department on the same film anyway, or would be people that we end up working with directly who would either come work with us or we'd work with them. So, it's used a lot, the idea that it's a family industry. And it is, because most of the people here, we all know each other. So even if it might be a competition at the end, it's ultimately still with a very good, we're always really championing whoever gets it. It's just always such a good thing,
I do think it is time for us to round off the episode. It's been wonderful hearing about the host and especially about Love and Monsters, but it is time for us to give our final recommendations. Now, Joe, I know you need to leave first, so would you like to put out your suggestions to our listeners?
Well, like I recommended to you guys, if you get the chance, please pick up or stream on Netflix Love and Monsters. It is a fantastic film. Maybe watch it before you show younger audiences, but it is generally acceptable.
Yeah.
I will also go out and recommend a book along a similar vein, because we all know that Joe loves to read. Warren Fay's Fragment. It is about strange and wonderful creatures on an island. It has kind of a Jurassic Park feel. It's basically about an island in the Pacific that has been apart from the rest of the world for hundreds of millions of years. And the creatures there, each one of them is about as nightmarish as you could find in Love and Monsters. And it is scientists going in to try and understand this world, but at the same time, not being prepared for what they find. And it is an absolutely fantastic, self-contained book. And it has all the science, all the monstery goodness that you could want. And it is a very action-driven book as well. So I'll give that a hearty recommend. Fellas?
Paul?
Yeah, I mean, Joe recommended that book to me, and I can confirm it's a very good read. But my recommendation is going to be a short movie called Here There Be Monsters.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I saw that we were having Toby on board, I had a look through IMDb to see what he had done, and he plays the monster in this short film that I wouldn't say is kid friendly, but it's a very enjoyable film. Me and my wife watched it last night, and the ending shocked us. But yeah. Here There Be Monsters. It's available on YouTube, and good watch.
And for myself, I recommend on social media that you make a point of following Arrow Video, because the amount of content that they have got for pre-order now is very exciting. They are getting the opportunity to release a lot of fantastic content. So I mentioned my brain's gone. I mentioned Daimajin. That's going to be coming out in July, the trilogy. There's also talk of some yokai goodness coming out in time for October, which I'm very excited about. So there's some classic 60s movies there. So do check out Arrow Video, because the content that they are getting hold of and the high quality physical releases that are coming out. I know that Paul said about streaming Love and Monsters. Sorry, Joe said that. But actually, I'd say go on Amazon and buy a copy of the Blu-ray, because I think physical copies all the way. It's the way forward. I think the fact that you get access to those special features, and there's so many wonderful things that you can enjoy. And you were talking about zombie movies, Toby. My favorite would have to be I suppose what's the term for it? Zack Snyder's re-envisaging of Dawn of the Dead. I think it's a wonderful modern take.
Oh, so good.
And that's my favorite Zack Snyder film. I think it's a wonderful film. It's not kid friendly in any way, but it's great fun. And then alongside that, watch The Host. It's a 15 certificate, so again, a bit more mature, but I think it's an absolutely phenomenal monster movie. Yeah, Toby, your recommendations.
Well, this will be a future recommendation, I guess. And if I can take the zombie line just for a second, there's a great project that I'm attached to called The Morning After. It'll be directed by two incredible human beings, Bonnie Drake and Johan Bramander. They're great UK filmmakers who did a film called American Burger. They all met through this, I think it's a UK, the Fantasia Film Festival. So Judd Tilliard, a producer, and working with David, who produced Day of the Dead. So we've got a nice little lineage there, and also joined by Tom Savini, who's a personal effects hero of mine, who is set to act in it. So that's on the cards, and we're all sort of working together to get that across the line. But that's going to be an incredible one to be a part of and to watch.
That sounds fantastic. And all being well, Toby, we'll have you back on the show at some point to talk about other things you've worked on and any future projects. So thank you very much. Joe, when you're ready, it's time for us to say goodbye.
Thanks, folks, as always, for listening, and keep it kaiju. The whole time I was watching the film, I was like, nothing better happened to that damn dog.
Yeah, I know, right?
If anything happens to that dog,
Yeah,
I hate this movie.
Everyone, that dog, man. They could have
okay, so basically, they were asking, it's like, were any effects done for the dog? Because that means at some point, somebody was going to do something to the dog.
Yeah, so, no. The dog was,
The dog was always going to live.
Always going to live. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we'll have to like put that in.
The dog lives.
That's the
dog was
only just.
Only oh gosh, would that? I mean, like when it went for
amount of times it got taken out. It's
when Boy went for that dress at the end, like it was really funny. So my partner was just like, "You didn't get this upset or like that tense with like kids or people were dying in such and such other film."
No,
like why?
No. It's the dog.
It's the dog.
Well, it's like that scene in Independence Day when like all of those people are killed by that blast
and then
of
the
laser.
dog just like
dog's okay, so who gives a shit? The dog jumps out of the way of the fire. We're fine.
People would have walked out. If that dog had died, it would have been the end. The people would have. It would be like, no, not going to happen.
We're done here.
Mass riding. It would have been like, oh, have you seen Love and Monsters? I mean, it's such a great film, but the dog dies. Like, oh, I don't want to see it now.
Yeah.
Literally, I've seen online people. That was their first question. Does the dog die?
Does the dog die?
There's a website. There's a website.
There's
called
not.
Does the dog
there is.
die?
Does the dog die? It's a website.
Yeah, there's a website for people like myself